The wedding reception lights dimmed, then the massive screen flared. Sarah, in her engagement ring, was tangled with Kyle on hotel sheets, the date stamp blinking, 11:48 p.m., March 29th. Her mother shrieked, but I let it play. "No one will ever know," Kyle whispered, his voice echoing, before I cut the feed. 300 guests sat in a stunned, ugly silence. The ballroom air, thick with the scent of lilies and roast beef, had grown heavy with unspoken anticipation. It was supposed to be the reception's grand entrance, the moment the future Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins Hansen would step out to their applause. Instead, the lights above the head table dimmed further, plunging the room into a deep indigo, and the massive projection screen that usually displayed childhood photos flickered to life. My breath hitched. Not from nerves, not anymore. This was a different kind of tight chest. On the screen, bathed in the soft yellow light of a hotel suite, Sarah lay tangled with Kyle. Her engagement ring, a 2-carat diamond I had spent too much on, glinted from her left hand, her fingers digging into the small of Kyle's bare back. The movement was unmistakable. A digital date stamp in the lower right corner pulsed red, 11:48 p.m., March 29th. The wedding was set for 11 o'clock the next morning. It was barely 12 hours before she was meant to walk down the aisle. A guttural shriek tore through the sudden silence. Doris Jenkins, Sarah's mother, a woman who usually maintained a facade of elegant composure, launched herself from her seat in the third row. Her silk gown shimmered as she stumbled toward the projection booth at the back of the room, her voice a raw, cracking sound. I watched, unmoved. I had let the video play for another 10 seconds, maybe 15. Long enough for every single one of the 300 guests, the elite of Bedford Hills, to register the scene, to recognize the faces, to understand the raw, ugly truth. Then Kyle's voice, a soft, intimate whisper, amplified to fill the entire ballroom, echoed through the speakers. "No one will ever know." The words, meant for Sarah's ears alone, hung in the air, a final damning declaration. I gave a subtle nod toward the AV technician, a young man with wide eyes and trembling hands. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than any silence I had ever known. It pressed down on the room, heavy and suffocating. Then, as if a dam had burst, a cacophony erupted. Gasps, whispers, shocked murmurs, and outright exclamations shattered the quiet. The room became a whirlwind of turning heads and panicked faces. It was at that precise moment, amidst the rising chaos, that the double doors at the main entrance burst open. Sarah stood there, framed in the doorway, her expensive white gown trailing behind her. Her bridal bouquet, a cascade of white roses and eucalyptus, was clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face, still made up for the pre-wedding photo shoot, was frozen in a mask of pure horror. Her eyes, wide and panicked, scanned the room and, absorbing the collective shock, the whispers, the damning evidence of my actions. Her gaze finally landed on me, standing alone on the second-floor balcony, a silent observer in the unfolding drama. Mascara, carefully applied just hours before, streamed down her cheeks, carving dark paths through her flawless makeup. "Daniel!" she screamed, her voice cracking, carrying clearly over the rising din. "How could you?" A grim, savage satisfaction bloomed in my chest. There was no guilt, no remorse, only a cold, hard clarity. I watched her perfect, carefully constructed world, the one she had built with meticulous care, the one that had included me as a dutiful, unsuspecting husband-to-be, crumble around her designer heels. I thought about the months leading up to this, the small, nagging doubts I had ignored, the gut instincts I had pushed down. The late-night calls Kyle always made when I was out of town, the way Sarah would sometimes flinch when I touched her unexpectedly, the casual mentions of business dinners that ran too late. I had dismissed them all, telling myself I was too busy with the accounting firm, too trusting, too damn blind. It was easy to be blind when you wanted to believe in the pretty picture. Until last night. Last night, everything had changed. It was the moment the pretty picture had finally shattered, revealing the ugly reality beneath. My name is Daniel Miller, or rather it was Daniel Miller, soon to be Jenkins Hansen. Until yesterday, I was engaged to Sarah Jenkins. That felt like a lifetime ago. A different man living a different story. The Sarah I thought I knew, the future I'd planned, had evaporated in a flash of projected images and whispered lies. The Jenkins family didn't just live in Bedford Hills. They were Bedford Hills, or at least a significant portion of its history and influence. Old money, political connections stretching back generations, and a quiet, almost inherent sense of superiority. Their surname was embossed on the plaque outside the town library, on a wing of the community hospital. They owned property, advised politicians, and occupied the top pews at the First Presbyterian Church every Sunday. My own upbringing was comfortable but distinctly middle class. My father, Frank, taught high school history, a respected job that paid the bills but certainly didn't afford country club memberships. My mother, Mary, worked as a registered nurse at the county hospital, putting in long shifts and bringing home the smell of disinfectant. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom ranch on the other side of town, a place that felt solid and real, but a universe away from the Jenkins' sprawling colonial mansion with its meticulously manicured lawns and an actual, honest-to-God carriage house. Sarah's parents, Robert and Doris, had accepted me into their fold with the enthusiasm of someone discovering an unexpected patch of mold in their prized wine cellar. Robert Jenkins, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weight of important thoughts, would peer at me over the top of his reading glasses. His gaze was rarely direct, always slightly above or beside my head, as if I were a mildly interesting lab specimen he was observing under less than ideal conditions. He'd nod or grunt or offer a clipped, "Good to see you, Daniel." It wasn't warmth, it was acknowledgement, a grudging allowance. Doris, on the other hand, was more direct, less subtle in her assessments. "The Jenkins name comes with certain expectations," she'd declare, swirling a crystal glass of Chardonnay at one of their many elaborate dinner parties. Her eyes would lock onto mine, a clear challenge. "Tradition, reputation, these things matter here, Daniel, more than you might be used to." I understood. She meant we come from somewhere you don't. I met Kyle Peterson freshman year at Westlake University. We were assigned to the same cramped dorm room, two strangers from different small towns, thrown together by fate in an overbooked housing department. We clicked fast. We survived all-nighters fueled by bad coffee and instant ramen, covered for each other when one of us needed to study at the local bar, and navigated the choppy waters of college life together. He became my brother, not by blood, but by shared experience. I remembered when my grandmother passed away during finals week. Kyle, despite having a crucial internship interview that day, skipped it. "Family comes first, man," he'd said, driving me the 4 hours home without a second thought. "I'll reschedule." That was Kyle, loyal, steadfast, or so I thought. When I started dating Sarah, Kyle had been genuinely happy for me. He slapped me on the back, a wide grin spreading across his face. Finally, Miller, you pulled yourself a good one. She's a looker too." Later, when I called him, nervous as hell, to ask him to be my best man, his response was immediate. "Of course, man," he'd said without hesitation. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. You know I've got your back, always." He'd clap me on the shoulder then, a firm, reassuring gesture that now felt like a cruel joke. The wedding itself became an immediate point of contention. The Jenkins insisted on the Hawthorne estate, a sprawling property known for its meticulously maintained gardens and its exorbitant prices. Weddings there started at 6 figures, a number that made my parents wince. Robert Jenkins had clapped me on the back with a forced joviality. "Don't you worry, Daniel, old boy. We'll go 50-50 on the costs." My parents, ever eager to make a good impression, agreed, but 50-50 and quickly became a moving target. Their idea of a shared expense meant pushing for every premium upgrade. The imported flowers, the open bar with top-shelf liquor, the live string quartet for the cocktail hour, the custom ice sculpture. Each small addition chipped away at my parents' retirement savings, a fund they had built carefully, dollar by hard-earned dollar, for decades. I tried quietly to suggest scaling back. "Maybe a smaller floral arrangement, Sarah. Or could we consider a local band instead of the New York ensemble?" Doris would cut me off, her voice firm, dismissive. The Jenkins have a certain standard to maintain, Daniel, she'd say, a fixed smile on her lips that allowed for no argument. This isn't just a wedding, it's a statement. I understood that statement clearly now. It was a statement about their status, their expectations, and my perceived inadequacy. Looking back, the red flags weren't just there, they were everywhere, waving frantically like warning signals in a storm. I saw them. I simply chose to ignore them, to look the other way, to rationalize, to convince myself that what I was seeing wasn't real, couldn't be real. Sarah and Kyle texted constantly. Her phone, a sleek silver model, was always in her hand, buzzing with their private exchanges. Sometimes, even at 2 in the morning, a soft glow would illuminate her face from the screen, and she'd slip out of bed, taking her phone with her to the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind her. She'd say it was her sister, or a work email. I wanted to believe her. They had inside jokes too, a shared glance, a stifled laugh, a phrase exchange that made no sense to me, followed by knowing smiles. I'd often walk into a room, the kitchen, the living room, even a quiet corner at a family gathering, and find them huddled close, their heads together. The moment my presence registered, their conversation would drop off abruptly, their bodies subtly shifting apart, leaving an awkward, palpable silence in their wake. Just a dumb meme, Sarah would say, her eyes darting away, her hand instinctively turning her phone screen from my view. When I asked what was so funny, Kyle would offer his usual line, a casual shrug accompanying the words, "Inside joke from college, man. You had to be there." I'd nod. I'd let it go. Part of it was genuine exhaustion. My work at Nexus Software was demanding. 60-hour weeks were the norm, designing and testing complex algorithms. My mind was often a tangled mess of code and deadlines, leaving little room for emotional detective work. But a larger part of it was my own stubborn pride, my fear of becoming that guy, the jealous, insecure fiancé who couldn't handle his future wife having male friends. I didn't want to be suspicious, to nitpick every interaction. That wasn't who I was. That wasn't the kind of trust I wanted in my relationship. Besides, this was Kyle, my best friend. The guy who, freshman year, had taken a beating from campus security after a bar brawl, all because he stepped in when another student tried to start a fight with me. He hadn't hesitated, had just jumped in. "You don't mess with my brother," he'd said, wiping blood from his lip, accepting the suspension like a badge of honor. He wouldn't betray me like that. Not him, not my best friend. That thought had been my shield, my constant reassurance against the growing unease. Then, a week before the wedding, with the final details swirling around us like a blizzard, Kyle stepped in. "Hey man," he'd said, catching me after a particularly grueling meeting with the caterers. "You look swamped. Let me handle the hotel reservations for all the out-of-town guests. I've got time and I know how to navigate those booking sites." He'd pulled out his phone, already having done some preliminary research. He showed me screenshots of various booking confirmations for distant aunts and uncles, cousins, and friends from college. His smile, but looking at his back, felt a little too wide, a little too eager. "See, got everyone sorted, the Hilton, the Marriott, a few at the boutique inn downtown, whatever works for them." "You've got enough on your plate," Kyle had insisted, waving a dismissive hand when I started to protest. "Seriously, consider it my best man duty. No need to thank me." And I had, profusely. I was genuinely, profoundly relieved to have one less responsibility on my shoulders. I clapped him on the back, feeling a surge of gratitude for my loyal, dependable friend. "You're a lifesaver, man. Truly." It wasn't until much later, after the ballroom display, that the full weight of that conversation hit me. I had thanked him. I had trusted him. I had, in my blind relief and unwavering belief in our friendship, effectively handed Kyle the keys to my betrayal. I had given him free rein, not just to book rooms for our guests, but to book rooms wherever he wanted, including one for himself, with Sarah, all under the guise of being my best man. The night before the wedding, the air at Castelli's, an upscale Italian restaurant handpicked by Doris, was thick with the rich scent of garlic and expectation. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing. Sarah, a vision in a dress that was practically bridal white, floated between guests, a practiced smile on her lips. She moved with effortless grace, charming everyone with anecdotes and perfectly timed laughter. My parents, Frank and Mary, sat awkwardly at a corner table, a little out of place amidst the Mitchells' wealthy friends. I watched as they tried to make polite conversation, nodding along as someone droned on about their summer home in Nantucket, their discomfort clear in their stiff posture and infrequent smiles. This was Sarah's world, a world I was supposed to be stepping into. Kyle, my best man, was across the room, leaning against the bar, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He'd catch my eye occasionally, offering a reassuring thumbs up, as if to say, "You're doing great, buddy." Each time, though, I noticed his eyes would linger, trailing after Sarah as she worked the room. He'd take a long, slow sip of his drink, his gaze following her every move. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I wonder, how did I not see it then? How could I have been so blind to the obvious? After running through the ceremony logistics for what felt like the 100th time, complete with Robert's stern instructions for the ushers and Doris's critical adjustments to the flower girl's path, we all moved into the adjacent bar lounge for a final round of drinks. The mood was festive, a mix of nervous energy and anticipatory laughter. Everyone was celebrating, looking forward to the big day. But then, a cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. I realized Sarah was no longer there. I scanned the room, my eyes darting through the crowd, searching for her white dress, her familiar blonde hair. Nothing. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, pulling out my phone. I dialed her number, my heart thudding a little harder with each ring. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. One of Sarah's bridesmaids, her cousin Beth, noticed my growing unease. She strolled over, a half-empty glass of Prosecco in her hand. "Don't worry," Beth said, a casual shrug of her shoulders. "Sarah just felt a little overwhelmed, I think. She said she was stepping out for some air." Beth's tone was dismissive, as if it were the most normal thing in the world for a bride to vanish from her rehearsal dinner the night before her wedding. I wasn't immediately concerned. Wedding jitters, I told myself. It happened. But then, a moment later, the ice truly began to form in my gut. Kyle was gone too. The bar stool he'd occupied was empty, his half-finished drink still sitting on the polished counter. My first instinct, the one fueled by months of misplaced trust, was innocent. Maybe he'd gone to pick up more champagne from the kitchen, or perhaps he was helping Sarah with some last-minute crisis, fulfilling his best man duties. He was, after all, my most loyal friend. But the nagging voice in my head, the one I'd been ignoring for months, the one I had so carefully suppressed, suddenly grew louder. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a shout, clear and undeniable. "Look for them. Don't ignore this. Not again." As an hour passed, then an hour and a half, with no sign of either Sarah or Kyle, my mind began to construct scenarios. Each one was worse than the last, more horrifying, more damning. The festive noise of the lounge started to recede, replaced by the thumping of my own frantic pulse. The champagne flutes, the polite laughter, the clinking of ice all faded into a distant hum. All I could hear was that voice growing louder and louder, confirming what I already knew, what I had desperately tried not to believe. The noise of the rehearsal dinner had become an unbearable hum, each laugh, each clink of glass, a fresh assault on my fraying nerves. My calls to Sarah had gone unanswered, my questions to her bridesmaids met with vague shrugs. Growing desperate, clinging to any thread, I pulled out my phone. It felt like a foolish, almost teenage move, but I scrolled through social media, a grim determination setting in. I wasn't looking for answers, not really, just confirmation of her location. Anything. Then there it was, a flicker. Sarah had accidentally uploaded a short Instagram story, a quick, blurry shot that must have been meant for Kyle or for a select few. It was gone almost as soon as it appeared, deleted so rapidly that I almost doubted I'd seen it at all. But I had. In that brief, agonizing moment, my eyes had registered the details. A hotel hallway, the distinctive, ornate gold-patterned carpet, swirling with dark blues and greens, and a partially visible door number. Just a glimpse, but enough. The distinct curves of an 8, followed by a 0, then a smudge. Room 800 something. My heart plummeted into my stomach, a cold, heavy stone. This wasn't the Hawthorne Estate, our wedding venue. That was an old, grand place with muted tapestries and hardwood floors. And it wasn't any of the handful of family-owned inns or chain hotels we'd officially booked for our out-of-town guests. This was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Sarah shouldn't be. Not at this hour, not alone. I mumbled something about a sudden, splitting headache to Robert Jenkins, who merely grunted, already deep in conversation with a potential donor for his latest political campaign. Without another word, I walked out of Castelli's, leaving behind the celebratory din and my increasingly uncomfortable parents. I got into my car, the leather seat cold against my back. Driving through downtown Bedford Hills, the streets were mostly empty, the storefronts dark. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, the leather creaking under the pressure. My mind raced, desperate for plausible explanations for any shred of innocence. Maybe she was picking up a surprise gift for me, a last-minute gesture of love. Maybe Kyle was just helping her with something, a friend offering assistance. They were both sentimental after all. But my gut, a cold, hard knot in my belly, knew better. It had known for months, pushing against the optimistic facade I'd so carefully constructed. Life's costly choices often unfold slowly, like a bad dream. Sometimes, though, they hit you like a punch to the gut, leaving you gasping for air. Stick around to the end to see how these choices unravel. I turned the corner onto Elm Street, my eyes sweeping the parked cars. And then I saw it. Kyle's sleek, dark gray Audi parked haphazardly near the entrance of the Westbrook Hotel. The Westbrook, one of the boutique establishments where Kyle had made reservations for some of our wedding guests under the guise of helping me out. The irony, the sheer audacity of it, threatened to choke me. My hands shook so badly that I had to try twice to pull the parking brake, the metal scraping harshly as it finally engaged. I cut the engine, plunging the car into silence, save for the frantic thumping of my own heart. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady myself, to appear normal. The night clerk, a young woman with a face buried in her phone, barely glanced up as I strode through the quiet lobby. I tried to walk with a casual confidence, as if I belonged there, as if I wasn't on the verge of uncovering a devastating truth. Inside the elevator, the air was still and warm. I jabbed the button for the 8th floor, the memory of that gold-patterned carpet and the partial room number from Sarah's accidental post burned into my brain, a beacon guiding me towards an inevitable heartbreak. The elevator doors glided open on the 8th floor, a silent, almost theatrical reveal. The plush, gold-patterned carpet, identical to the one in Sarah's accidental Instagram story, stretched down the hallway. My heart, a relentless drum against my ribs, thundered in my chest, each beat echoing in the sudden quiet. I stepped out, my feet sinking slightly into the thick pile, and scanned the door numbers. My eyes darted from 841 to 843, past 841, then 846. There it was, room 847. The last digit, the 7, confirmed the fragmented image I'd seen. I moved slowly, deliberately towards the door, my movements feeling detached, as if watching myself in a low-budget film. I pressed my ear against the cool, solid wood, holding my breath, straining to catch any sound from within. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but the faint hum of the hotel's ventilation system, a distant traffic drone from the street below. My mind tried to cling to that silence, to convince myself I was wrong, that this was all a terrible mistake, a series of unfortunate coincidences. Then, unmistakably, it reached me, Sarah's laugh, that soft, throaty chuckle, the one she reserved for truly intimate moments, for whispers shared in the dark, for jokes that only we understood. It wasn't the polite, effervescent laugh she used for Doris's friends, or the slightly forced ones she offered to my father's corny jokes. This was raw, unguarded, full of a warmth I had believed was solely mine. My hands, already cold with dread, went completely numb. The blood seemed to drain from my fingertips, leaving them stiff and useless. Mechanically, as if operating on instinct alone, I reached for the door handle. I turned it slowly, quietly, not expecting anything, just needing to try. To my shock, it wasn't deadbolted. It only clicked, the latch giving way. It was secured solely by the electronic lock, the kind that disengages with a standard keycard. And then I remembered, the master keycard. Kyle had given it to me 2 days ago, a flimsy plastic rectangle with a generic hotel logo. "For wedding emergencies, man," he'd said, a casual shrug. "The hotel gave me a few extras for the wedding party, just in case someone loses theirs or needs to get into a guest room to drop off a welcome basket." He'd handed it over with such an air of helpfulness, of foresight, that I hadn't questioned it for a second. With trembling fingers that felt mild alien to me, I fished it from my wallet. The plastic was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the burning rage and icy despair churning within me. I slid the card into the slot above the handle. There was a soft, almost imperceptible click, and the tiny LED light turned green. Permission granted. They had, in their arrogance, in their utter disregard for me, handed me the very tool to expose their betrayal. It was almost poetic, in the most sickening way. I pushed the door inward, a slow, silent movement that barely disturbed the air. I slipped inside, a ghost entering my own nightmare. The room was dimly lit, bathed in the soft, warm glow of a bedside lamp. Soft music, a mellow, unfamiliar R&B track, was playing quietly from a phone on the nightstand, its screen glowing faintly. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and something else, something cloying and intimate, a scent that already felt too familiar. My eyes scanned the room, every detail coming into sharp, brutal focus. The king-size bed, pristine white sheets rumpled and askew, dominated the dimly lit room. On it lay Sarah and Kyle, both in a state of half-dressed, tangled together in an embrace that left no room for doubt. No room for excuses, no room for the hopeful rationalizations I had clung to for so long. The faint, sweet scent of Sarah's perfume, mixed with something distinctly masculine, hung heavy in the air. "I'm going to miss this when you're Mrs. Miller," Kyle murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble. He ran his fingers through Sarah's hair, letting a strand curl around his index finger. The soft, quiet music from the nightstand phone seemed to underscore the casual ease of their interaction. The comfortable familiarity that comes from long practice, not a single impulsive mistake. Sarah laughed again, that very same intimate laugh I had heard through the door, the one I had believed was reserved solely for moments shared with me in the quiet privacy of our home. It was a sound that had once filled me with warmth and security. Now it was a knife twisting in my gut. "Who says it has to stop just because there's a ring?" she replied, her voice playful, devoid of any real malice, only a careless indifference. She shifted, pressing closer into Kyle's side, her hand resting on his bare chest. I stood there, just inside the doorway, a ghost unnoticed. I had witnessed enough, I had heard enough. The last flicker of hope, of denial, extinguished itself. In its place, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. There was no pain, no tears, no dramatic outcry, just a stark, absolute understanding of what had been done to me. My hand, no longer trembling, moved to my pocket. I pulled out my phone, the screen a sudden bright rectangle in the dim room. My fingers, steady now with a cold, righteous purpose, navigated to the camera app. With the silent precision of a surgeon, I began recording. I captured the scene on the bed, the undeniable evidence of their deceit, the casual intimacy, the damning dialogue, the timestamp, the faces, the crumpled sheets. Every detail was meticulously preserved. This wasn't for proof, it was for justice. In that moment, standing in the quiet humiliation of that hotel room, I knew exactly what I had to do. My gut instinct, the one I had ignored for months, pushed down under layers of trust and willful blindness, was now screaming. Not for anger, not for vengeance in the heat of the moment, but for a calculated public reckoning. The plan for the wedding day reveal began to form in my mind, cold, precise, and devastating in its simplicity. It would be an answer to their arrogance, their casual betrayal, their belief that they could operate in the shadows without consequence. My calculated patience, the very quality that had allowed them to get away with it for so long, would now be turned against them. The projection screen, the grand stage for their public humiliation. It was the perfect, brutal answer. It was a mirror reflecting their secret shame for all to see. The ensuing chaos in the ballroom, the shock of 300 guests, Sarah's face contorted in horror as she realized her perfect world was crumbling. It was the bitter price they had to pay. Kyle's whispered words, "No one will ever know," echoing through the speakers, only to be utterly disproven, was the final precise blow. The savage satisfaction I felt standing on that second-floor balcony wasn't born of malice, not entirely. It was the culmination of months of quiet suffering, of suppressed doubts, and one night of devastating, undeniable discovery. It was the calm before the storm. The silence that had followed the video's end in the ballroom was finally broken by a cacophony of gasps and shocked whispers. Sarah's scream, "Daniel, how could you?" still echoed, but it had no power over me. Standing on the balcony, watching her world unravel, felt less like an act of revenge and more like a necessary reset. The love I had felt for her, for the idea of her, was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow space. Kyle, my supposed brother, was no more. The betrayal had cut clean, severing ties I once thought unbreakable. There was no triumph, only a quiet, grim satisfaction that the truth, however ugly, was finally out. The facade was shattered, and everyone, including me, could finally see what lay beneath. This was not the end I envisioned, but it was an end, and perhaps a new beginning. The silence that had followed the video's end in the ballroom was finally broken by a cacophony of gasps and shocked whispers. Sarah's scream, "Daniel, how could you?" still echoed, but it had no power over me. Standing on the balcony, watching her world unravel, felt less like an act of revenge and more like a necessary reset. The love I had felt for her, for the idea of her, was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow space where trust used to reside. Kyle, my supposed brother, was no more than a ghost of a past friendship. The betrayal had cut clean, severing ties I once thought unbreakable, leaving behind a stark, undeniable truth. There was no sense of triumph, no dramatic relief, only a quiet, grim satisfaction that the truth, however ugly, was finally out. The carefully constructed facade was shattered, and everyone, including me, could finally see what lay beneath the polished surface. This was not the end I had envisioned, certainly not the future I had planned, but it was an end nonetheless, and perhaps within its cold finality lay the seeds of a new beginning.